Good evening, everybody. This is Michael Koselniak, Chairman of the Safety Committee for the Colorado Pilots Association. And it's Monday, October 17th, and we're here to bring you CPA Presents. And tonight, our special guest is Luke Garner from the Denver TRACON. Luke began his career as an air traffic controller 15 years ago at the Fort Pierce ATCT on the east coast of Florida. From there, he transferred to Miami Tower, where he learned radar. Since 2016, Luke has worked at the Denver TRACON. He is also an active pilot, currently a member of the 10 High Flyers out of Rocky Mountain Metro. He greatly enjoys flying the club's Bonanza, Saratoga, and Dakota with his wife and 2 young boys. Luke is going to talk about the Denver TRACON Bravo airspace, along with the hot spots that general aviation community should be aware of, TFR procedures, emergency procedures, communications, and the crazy Colorado weather. With that, I'll turn it over to Luke. Thank you, Luke.
Hey, thank you, Mike, and thank you everybody for being here today. Let's see, a couple years into this, we should have this Zoom thing figured out. Let me see if a little PowerPoint presentation. Are y'all seeing that on your screen there?
Yep, you're good
thumbs
to go.
up from Mike or something. All right, sounds good. So this is kind of our Operation Rain Check slideshow. Give you a brief overview of the TRACON operations and what we do here, kind of on a day-to-day basis. Denver TRACON, we're kind of the meat and a sandwich between the towers and Denver Center. Our airspace is 42 nautical miles centered around Denver International. And we control within that 42 nautical miles from the surface up to flight level 230. We also do arrival and departure services for 4 control tower airports and 6 uncontrolled airports along the Front Range. And we also have 2 remote sectors where we provide radar services for Grand Junction and for Pueblo. We have about, and this number goes up and down as people come and go. We have about 80 something controllers. About half of those are what we call departure controllers, who work mainly departures off Denver International, and also the satellite arrivals, which would be, Centennial, Rocky Mountain Metro, Northern Colorado Regional, that sort of stuff. And then 40 arrival controllers who mostly do the arrivals into Denver International, and they also work at that Grand Junction and Pueblo sector. We also have some supervisors, management, staff support specialists, airspace specialists, and that sort of thing. We do kind of 3 shifts: a day shift, a night shift, and an overnight, because we're a 24-hour facility. During the day and the night shift, we have about 20 controllers, and then on the overnight, there's 2 people here who have to be here all night long. If you go inside of our TRACON, this is kind of a top-down view of the different sectors. Each one of those green circles is a radar position. Along that top row there, you can see the SR, which would be satellite radar, and you can see those frequencies. If you fly in this area, you might be used to some of those frequencies there. 26.1 out of Metro or 32.75 out of Centennial. So that top row there is working our departures and our satellites. Along the bottom row is the Denver arrivals. So that'd be the finals and the arrivals. Along the right-hand side, you can see the Junction radar and Pueblo radar sectors. And then over on the left side are our monitor scopes, where during bad weather at Denver International, we can run closely spaced, independent approaches in IMC conditions. So we can have 3 aircraft on instrument approaches, ILSs side by side. This is what our main piece of equipment looks like, our radar scope. On the left-hand side, that smaller screen is the communications console. Kind of the top half of it there is the ground to air. Those are the frequencies that we key up. And those bottom ones there, those red and blue, are those are our landlines. So that's how we talk amongst the other controllers. The red ones are the other positions inside the TRACON, and the blue ones are sort of dedicated telephone lines to Denver Center and to the control tower, Cheyenne approach, Colorado Springs approach, that sort of thing. The main scope, pretty straightforward radar scope. With a keyboard down there on the bottom, we can enter some basic flight plan information and just kind of keep track of things that way. And on the right, every flight will generate a paper flight progress strip. We don't really use those for arrivals much anymore, but anyway, yeah, most of the satellite information aircraft will pop out a strip there with a flight plan, so we can see where they're going, beacon code, proposed time off, and that sort of thing. And I'm kind of going through this relatively quickly. If there's anything y'all have questions on later, I'd be happy to go back and cover it in more detail. This is that on that radar scope. This is our base map that we use to kind of orientate ourselves. You can see all the airports that we work there. This map's a little, we still got FTG for front range there and a couple other things. So needs to be updated, this slide in particular. But again, those are the airports that we work. You can see Denver International right in the middle with the finals, kind of the final approach. The ILS is going south from there. This is that same map, just without the overlay on it. Those numbers that you can see there, that's the front range on the left side. Those kind of jagged lines there is the mountains kind of starting. Those are our minimum vectoring altitudes that we deal with in the west side of our airspace. Obviously, we're trying to keep aircraft away from the mountains, especially those that are being vectored or on IFR flight plans. Some of this stuff is more particular to Denver International, so I'm going to kind of go through really quickly. These are our arrival routes into Denver International, mostly for turbojet aircraft. These are our Denver International. The yellow are the departures and the grays are the arrivals. Kind of looking at COVID-19 here, we did see a little bit of a decrease in traffic. But we've definitely seen that pick back up here in the past year or two to where we're not quite at where we were at before March of 2020, but we're getting very close to those numbers. Hopefully you're all pretty familiar with this. This is Denver Class B airspace. It's obviously designed to keep, provide positive separation for Denver International aircraft landing and departing from there. Let's see. One of the big things we wanted to talk about is Class Bravo excursions, where turbojet aircraft that are operating inside Bravo airspace will from time to time drop out of the bottom of the Bravo airspace, basically. And you can see on these colored areas, especially the ones that are, in there to the southeast, these are tracks of airliners that have come in and exited beneath the bottom of the Bravo airspace. It is a requirement for aircraft, for the turbine-engined aircraft landing at Denver International to remain above the floor of the Bravo airspace. However, from time to time, that doesn't happen. Things happen when you're doing several thousand operations a day. Occasionally, these aircraft do come out of the bottom of the Bravo airspace. Here's looking at about a 1 year period. There were over 10,000 excursions outside Bravo airspace of turbojet aircraft, and you can kind of see where they're, the biggest hotspots are south of Denver International, kind of east of Centennial. And then there's another one kind of north up there by Greeley of aircraft that, generally speaking, these are aircraft that are around, 8,000 feet, and they'll go below that shelf of the Bravo airspace and then re-enter once you get into the 7,000 foot. To kind of look, here's one example in particular that we're talking about. You can see, looking at our radar scope, we have Denver International at the very top of the screen. Those dashed lines coming from the top to the bottom are the final approach courses. You can see that kind of gray track with that 1200 beacon code as an aircraft that departed off of the spaceport. Now, it's probably front range at the time at 6,700. That's the 067, doing 110 knots of ground speed. And then the other aircraft on the crossing course would be, that'd be an Airbus 321, currently at 10,000 feet, going inbound to runway 35 right at Denver International. And we can kind of look here. That's when the aircraft was cleared for the visual approach. You can see the Airbus is currently in the 8,000 foot Bravo shelf, and they've dropped beneath it. So now they're outside the Bravo airspace at 7,500. we've seen this a lot, and this has been an education and outreach to the airline community, to the chief pilots, and that we've worked with them. We've given the same presentation to them to explain the importance of remaining in the Bravo airspace. But you can see there that the airliner is direct to the final approach fix, and that crossing altitude at the final approach fix is 7,500. So in this particular instance, the flight crew was going direct to the final approach fix. That altitude is 7,500. So that was, it appears as sort of a dive and drive, if you remember that from your IFR training. What we see next is actually the Airbus keeps going down to 7,000, and now we have the two aircraft, which are, you have your 1,200 aircraft, which is at 7,200, actually passing above the Airbus going into Denver International. So it's obviously a close call and something that we're really trying to avoid. Like I said, the Bravo airspace is really designed to keep the fast turbojet aircraft away from the aircraft operating outside the Bravo airspace. But even if that airliner was right there at the 7,000, they're just about to re-enter the Bravo airspace. So kind of the message that we always give is that even if you're operating a couple of 100 feet below the Bravo airspace, these fast turbojet aircraft can be directly above you at the floor of that Bravo airspace. And if you have a turbojet aircraft going a couple of 100 feet above you, that's not much room or not much margin for error. There's a similar incident of looks like another Frontier Airbus going into Denver. This one is in the Bravo, and we actually have this looks like someone who departed off of Centennial and has climbed up into that 8,000-foot shelf. Same sort of situation where we have a VFR aircraft passing above an airliner. Obviously at 8,200, they're in the Bravo airspace, violating the Bravo airspace there. This is just kind of looking over, I think this is a 1-day period back in February of 2017 of every aircraft that was squawking 1,200. So we know the airspace is busy. We know it's congested out there. Especially as we get in and look at the flyways around Denver International. Obviously with the Bravo airspace is, between the Front Range and the Bravo, there's not a ton of room. There's not a lot of space to go back and forth to get north to south along the Front Range. These flyways are posted, and we do recommend following them. If it's 8,500 feet southbound west of Wadsworth airspace, and then west of Interstate 25 northbound at 7,500 for getting along the north and south on the west side of the airspace there. And then transversing through the 8,000-foot shelf north and east of Denver International. It's kind of the easiest way to get through there. I think that's the same thing. Yeah, that's the flyway chart. We strongly encourage VFR flight following. We think it's a fantastic tool. If we know you're out there and we're in direct communication with you, we can keep you advised of other traffic in the area. We can recommend altitudes and courses. We would honestly much rather have you out there so we know who you are, where you're going, what your intentions are, versus a 1,200 code that's just we're basically just guessing at that point. Centennial, like we were talking about before the presentation started, Centennial is getting busier and busier every day. Rocky Mountain Metro has seen traffic levels that we've never seen before out of there. All these airports all in our airspace are seeing just vastly increased amount of traffic. We're getting a lot of business jets, turbojets going into these aircraft, into these airports as well, and just trying to keep all these different types of aircraft separated and getting going on their way. It's a lot easier if we know who you are. So that's why I said we strongly recommend VFR flight following. When you do it, this is kind of basic stuff, but calls up, say approach, call sign, just your location and altitude with a request. Obviously it's nice when you say Skyhawk, Skylane, Tiger, whatever it is, that always saves time if you say your type of aircraft with a call sign. And we know these frequencies are busy, but if you just do a short and quick VFR call up, it's usually pretty quick for us to type in the call sign, get you a beacon code, and get you under radar contact. If you're under flight following, we have two different ways we can issue traffic. The first one is the traffic advisory. It's probably what you've heard many times. Traffic 2 o'clock, 3 miles westbound of Cirrus, 8,500. If in the controller's opinion, the controller's judgment, you're in an unsafe proximity to terrain obstructions or another aircraft, we will issue what's called a safety alert, which is actually mandatory for us to do for flight follow or for any aircraft which we have radar contact with. And that's the phraseology. What you hear for that is traffic alert, and then your call sign. And then we'll usually say advise you turn left or right, climb or descend immediately. So the first one is an advisory for you to start looking out the window for traffic. And the second one is if you're in an unsafe proximity to a potential hazard out there is when we'd issue the safety alert. Just talking about control airspace there. I think we're all pretty familiar with that. I'm not going to go into this stuff about Class Delta airspace. TFRs, we do have the relatively common TFRs in our airspace for the sporting events. The easiest way that I've found when flying around is on ForeFlight or one of those other EFB apps does a really good job of displaying those. We will at the TRACON, there's someone at the stadium who calls us 1 hour before the event, and they will call us when the event is over. So we know the TFR, I think, usually goes to about an hour after the event ends. So we'll get those times and we put them up on a board in the TRACON. So if you're ever curious, is this TFR active or not, even if you're not under flight following, keying up on one of our frequencies and asking, is the TFR over Bronco Stadium, whatever it is now, Mile High, whatever that it's named this on this particular week, we can just tell you if it's active or inactive at that time. We also get a lot of TFRs, and fortunately this year's been pretty quiet, but in years past, we've seen a lot of fire TFRs, just, obviously to keep, to allow the fire bombers out there space to operate in. VIP movements will get TFRs and air shows. Again, you can go to ForeFlight or Garmin, Jepson. They all have the EFB apps, and then also TFR.faa.gov is a good resource. Or again, just ask on frequency, and we'll be able to tell you pretty quickly because we actually pull them up on the radar scope. So we'll paint that little circle that'll be active on our radar scope if the TFR is active. The left 16 is doing an air show there. Emergency procedures, I'm sure you've heard this too: aviate, navigate, communicate. We are here to help. We deal with a ton of, I'm at work right now, and just a few minutes ago, we had a United Airlines with someone going into cardiac arrest. And so we moved everyone else out of the way to get them on the ground as quickly as possible. It's something that we deal with on a pretty regular basis here. So we're here to help on any sort of emergency or any situation that you have. We do have 21.5 keyed up at the supervisor position in the TRACON. And if you squawk one of those emergency codes, it'll pop up on every radar screen in the room. So we'll be able to see that. But the easiest and quickest way to get attention is whatever frequency you happen to be on, whatever approach frequency you're on. Just say Mayday, emergency, pan like we saw for the first time here not too long ago. Not for the first time, but we saw recently here. And then we'll do everything we can. We have a lot of fortunately for this facility, we have a lot of pilots. We have a lot of CFIs. People who can help out on a lot of sort of GA type of emergencies. And then the last one, kind of briefly, weather. Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know if we need to get into a huge weather briefing. I know CPA has done some more, people probably more qualified than me to talk about this sort of stuff here. Um, we do see a lot of convective weather. Anyone who flies in this area certainly knows that, especially in the summertime. A lot of thunderstorms, a lot of gusty winds, a lot of wind shear, microbursts. I'm not really sure what this particular slide is showing there. This is our windscreen display for Denver International, showing the runways on the left column. On that bottom one right there is that's the wind shear alert for runway 34 right arrivals, and it's showing a 20 knot gain on a 1 mile final. That's just the regular runway wind is what's circled there. More wind shear alerts 2 minutes later, I guess is what they're showing here. And then, we have the same thing. Here's a microburst alert with 95 knot loss. So that's a very serious microburst coming out of there. So at Denver International, we do have the low level wind shear system. The best way we can get for Metro and Centennial in the satellite airports is through PIREPs. If you report to the tower to approach that you had a loss wind shear on final, that'll get put into the PIREP system and passed along. Usually put on the ATIS. And I guess the last thing we have on here is just a little, maybe some promotion where, they're always hiring for controllers. If you or someone it has to be under 30 years old and a U.S. citizen. But you can go on the FAA's website or USA Jobs, I suppose. All right, so now I guess I'll move on to the question and answer period here. If anyone has any questions or comments or like me to go over any of that in more detail, I'd be happy to answer those.
Let me get back. This is Mike. Let me get back to my notes here.
Sure.
You spoke a little bit, and I caught the name, but I didn't understand it in its entirety. Satellite radar. What?
Oh, yes, sir. Yeah, so we name our sectors here, just kind of a way to keep track of them. So we have really 4 different types of sectors here. We have the arrivals, which will take the Denver International aircraft from Denver Center and kind of set them up on the downwind and the base leg. The final sector basically turns them onto final and sequences them. That's for Denver arrivals. On the departure side, we'll have Denver departures and we'll have satellite departures. So our airspace is, that 43 nautical mile airspace is divided up. Each controller working in front of a radar scope will have dedicated airspace and altitudes that is their allocated airspace. And lots of that many of those sectors are the satellite sectors. And the easiest way for the pilot's perspective is, each one of those sectors will have a frequency. So if you're flying out of Centennial at 3275, that frequency is allocated to our satellite number 4 sector, which works the southern half of our airspace, including Centennial. 26.1 or actually 25.25, if you're used to that frequency out on the west side, would be our satellite radar sector number 1 for Rocky Mountain Metro. I don't know if that's kind of answering the question, but it's just the name that we have for the sort of lower altitude sectors that work these satellite airports.
Okay. All right. So satellite means satellite airports, really, for little areas around. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Saw the screen and the touch pads and all that, and my question is, how long does the controllers have screen time for and take breaks? I mean, that's a lot on your own.
Sure. Yeah, we work 8-hour shifts. Can go to a 10-hour shift with some if we're short on a particular day. Basically everyone else these days, I think we are kind of short staffed. We don't have as many people as we should to run this place on without overtime. So especially in the summertime, We are mandatory overtime, a lot of 6-day work weeks, some 10-hour days. Within that, you'll come to work and you'll work about an hour and a half to about 2 hours, and then you'll take a break. The breaks are somewhere around 30 minutes or so. And in my personal opinion, it's pretty beneficial because it's when you're sitting there on the radar scope, obviously you don't have your cell phone. You're not you can't eat. You really can't eat or drink. You can have a bottle of water or something, but you kind of focused on working the position. So it is very beneficial. We really do need that time away to kind of recharge and come back after 30 minutes or so. So
Right.
generally in an 8-hour shift, we'll do 3 or 4 of those kind of hour and a half to 2 hour stints with 30-minute breaks in between. It's our general
Okay.
rotation. Mhm.
And then on your on the screen, you talked about a beacon code. Is that the same thing as a squawk code?
Yes, sir. Mhm.
Okay, so you can tell them to squawk 1, 2, 3, 4, and they plug it in, and then it comes on the screen. Okay, good.
Mhm.
Now, where you were showing the 2 aircraft converging below the 7,500 or 7,000, and you
Mhm.
guys see that in real time on your scopes. I'm sure you guys are talking to the pilots and all that good stuff. But after
Mhm.
those violations occur, do
Mhm.
letters get sent to the airlines?
Yeah. So if an airline goes below the Class Bravo airspace, then we do kind of note that in our facility log with the call sign and the time. The same thing would be for a general aviation aircraft that enters the Bravo airspace. Again, we're air traffic controllers, and we're not the FSDOs. If you've ever been over here, the FSDOs across the street. That's sort of a separate department here. So we have a facility log where we'll note the call sign, either of the airliner or the GA aircraft, if we're able to determine that, and a time. And then we have a quality control. We've got basically 1 or 2 people in the back who review radar tapes of any incidents that occur, and they have contacts within the airlines or across the street at the FSDO. So those sort of things get reported up. And then it'll go back to, and honestly, at that point, once it happens, once it gets reported to the airlines, I'm not sure what happens at that point. But
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
I remember back when I was a student pilot, I broke Class Bravo airspace,
Mhm.
and the controller came on and asked me some questions, and he says, "It's a good thing you said student pilot." Because
Yeah.
you might be getting a phone
Mhm.
call later. And I
Oh yeah.
apologized up and down and scooted back to Claremont, New Hampshire as fast as I could. But yeah, thankfully I
Sure.
said student
Mhm.
pilot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, like I said, I can speak for myself personally. As I'm not I'm not any sort of enforcement or anything else. My main mission is just to keep everyone separated, keep the aircraft separated and going on their way here. So this stuff happens all the time where usually a word to the wise is sufficient to keep everyone doing what they're supposed to be doing, unless it's something very egregious or whatnot. For me personally, I'll just say, hey, here's your altimeter, make sure you're below this altitude in this airspace and that sort of thing. So
Right. Okay. All right.
Mhm.
That's all the questions I have.
Mhm.
Yeah, Luke, I'm out here in Grand Junction, and I've got an
Mhm.
RV-14, so I don't have any occasion to use those arrival corridors into DIA.
Mhm.
A
Yes,
couple
sir.
questions about those. I think there are 2 tracks assigned to each one of those corridors. Is that correct?
Mhm. Yes, sir.
Okay, and the main question I have, again, never having used one of those, I know that depending on weather, especially a convective weather in the summertime, you'll be using one of those and then it'll get turned off and you'll use a different one because of weather. And my
Mhm.
question is, who makes that decision? How do they make it? And when do they make it? What's the background
Mhm.
behind making a switch like that?
Mhm. So at both Denver Center and here in the TRACON, we have our traffic management unit, which is generally one person who is responsible for sort of kind of the big picture, watching over the flow of aircraft coming in and out of the airspace, and also watching the weather. So depending on how it's coming up, that can either start at the sector with the controller working the position. If they start getting more and more deviations, they can look at the traffic management unit and say, I'm having a hard time keeping aircraft on this arrival. Maybe we should look at closing that gate, closing one of the 2 routes, working on, we have a number of different ways we can keep the aircraft coming into the airspace, but keeping them away from those convective areas. So like I said, a lot of times it'll come from the sector where the controller is unable to keep going. Sometimes the TMU, the traffic management unit, will see the weather building and preemptively close that one arrival route or the entire departure gate. And at which point the Denver Center will reroute aircraft usually to one of the other 3 arrival gates to keep them coming in.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We've had a couple questions come in chat for
okay,
everybody. Kent D's got a question with ADSB and so many more ADSB in options. Is ATC seeing a reduction in the need for safety alerts for potential collisions?
Yeah, ADSB is a fantastic tool, and to be honest, I don't know if I would. I think it's something that I really like having when I'm out there flying around, having that extra perspective. Because of the volume of traffic that's out there, I wish I could say we'd seen a decrease in the need for safety alerts. What we do see a lot of the time is pilots will say we have them on the screen, we have them on the fish finder, whatever that is, which is always good to hear. It doesn't really, we're looking for visual separation is really, until we know that you see that aircraft out the window, I'm really personally not satisfied that, that's a conflict that's been resolved. So I think it's a great situational awareness tool and something that can help out of, giving you kind of somewhat similar to the same picture that we have. But I still think we're seeing, with this, how busy as it is, we still see quite a lot of traffic advisories and safety alerts, especially in, the busy practice areas, east and west of Centennial, north of Metro, and even up around, Greeley and NoCo, like I said, it's beating a dead horse here, but it's really busy out there on the Front Range.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that gets to the answer to that question.
John T has a question, or a couple of them actually. A few years ago, I heard of a conflict between a retardant aircraft and a Boeing 737 and a large TFR west of Boulder. Have any other instances occurred in the past few years? In that particular instance, it was defined as a near miss and both aircraft had to deviate. It was my understanding that ATC can route IFR aircraft through an active A2 fire TFR.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular incident. It's something that I haven't heard of. In terms of routing IFR aircraft, generally speaking, if it's an active TFR, we will take basically everyone, IFR and VFR, to try to keep them out of that airspace. The fire TFRs, for IFR aircraft, will have a top altitude, so occasionally we'll go over the top of them, or we will sometimes get a call that they're done with their activities for the day, in which case we could take IFR aircraft through there. But generally speaking, if unless we're completely sure that the TFR is cold or it's capped at a certain altitude, we would keep IFR and VFR aircraft away from there.
John T's got one other question. Can aircraft without an electrical system and no ADSB under any circumstances operate beneath the Class B veil or even in Class B?
It's an interesting question. Again, that might be, I might not be the best person to answer that, to be completely honest with you. I know there are waivers for the Class Bravo under certain particular instances, and we do deal with that from time to time of aircraft who don't have a transponder and they're on a maintenance repositioning flight or something like that. And, those will get briefed out from the facility management to the controllers. At such and such a time, expect an aircraft without a transponder. This is their planned route of flight and that sort of thing. I know there are instances where that can happen, but to be honest, I think that'd be more of a question for maybe the FSDO or somebody else who would know about those exceptions and exemptions.
Yeah, my understanding, from recalling this in my training past, that you should be able to do inside the mode C. You just have to call ahead to like the FSDO, and again, you get the time slot. I don't know about the B though. So now it's my questions. I got everybody else's out of the way. So is it So this is how I operate when I'm either arriving or departing, or arriving, and I'm pick up like 126.1 out of Metro. I will, call it up as Denver approach if I'm coming in, and Denver departure if I'm leaving. Does that help you guys in any way? Because it gives you an indication
Yeah.
as to my intent.
It couldn't hurt, to be honest. That sort of first thing for me personally is in one ear, out the other. I'm listening
Okay.
for type of aircraft, call sign, where you are, what your intentions are, that sort of thing. And a lot of times we'll get, Centennial approach, Metro approach, that sort of thing, instead of Denver. I mean, I appreciate the thought. I mean, it certainly couldn't hurt. If I hear departure, I'm probably going to think this is more of a, someone who's looking to pick up flight following or something like that. I think if that's something that, you like doing and that works for you, I think it's great and it's a good habit to be in. But I don't know if it's strictly necessary, if that makes sense.
Okay. The other question, I've got a whole bunch of them.
Sure. No, you're good.
So, is it best to call up initially and say, Denver approach Skyhawk 61657 request, and then allow you time to gather the necessary whatever you need to put together before putting in your request, or is it more fluid for you guys?
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, that's kind of the best way to do it. Denver approach November 61657, and then you can say something like, if you very quickly, just a VFR flight following request, or, if you're looking to pick up, if you're off of Boulder or off of Erie or Longmont, we're requesting to, pick up an IFR clearance. So, it could be a different, it can be kind of the actions that I take is I'll actually assign a different beacon code if it's VFR versus IFR, or if you already have an IFR on file, I can look for that flight progress strip, which I'll have in front of me if you're looking to pick up your IFR. But yeah, if you're just departed off Metro or you're inbound and you're looking to pick up VFR, approach November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, request VFR flight following, and then I'll usually come back with what's your destination, type of aircraft if I don't remember it, or if it wasn't mentioned in that first call, and altitude usually. If you're inbound, to one of the airports, approach Skyhawk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, request flight following to Metro, something like that. So as I said, generally speaking, that initial call up, kind of keep it relatively short. And then we'll get back into that more of the back and forth once that communication's been established.
Okay. Do you find that the flight schools are using flight following?
It probably depends on the flight school, and I'd say it's more for the instrument training. This is kind of my personal guess. We see a lot of instrument practice approaches, which again I strongly encourage if you're out there doing practice instrument maneuvers to get the flight following. There's you can see sometimes there's aircraft out there that track and they intercept the final approach course and head inbound, and then right at the edge of the Delta airspace they'll break out and kind of come back around and do it again, which it's you're in echo airspace. It's certainly you're right to be out there doing that kind of stuff, but if there's another aircraft, a Cirrus or a turbojet or a King Air or something like that, who's going to be a little faster, it can work better for everyone if there's, if we can provide that sequencing. So if you call us up, we'll try to get you on that approach as quick as we can, mixed in with all the other aircraft that we have going in. In terms of, you will from time to time have aircraft call up saying we're just looking for advisories in the practice area, but that's probably the exception. I don't see that very often. But again, there's, I would encourage it. I think it's even if you're just out there doing, steep turns and all commercial maneuvers or whatever it is you're doing out there, I've got no problem with giving you a beacon code and issuing whatever traffic that happens to be coming your way as an extra set of eyes. So.
Okay. So this dawned on me the other day. I've been single pilot IFR conditions and no autopilot, so I was pretty task saturated.
Sure.
I was at that time I was coming into Metro, which was VFR conditions, so I knew it was okay. But it dawned on me when I was out doing some work with another instructor or with an instructor that if I was a single pilot in IMC conditions and basically hitting the task saturation level to the point where I couldn't properly brief a plate, is that something we could request to have done?
Yeah, from like have air traffic control say, hey, I need the, certainly, so we have the approach plates. It's very easy for us to
Okay.
pull up the approach plate. If that's something, to be honest with you, on a routine basis, it's not something I would recommend is, hey, what's the,
Right.
can you give me an approach briefing on this? But if it's something where it's, especially if you're in IMC, if it's, maybe not quite at that emergency point, but it's like you really need to set it. What is the localizer frequency for Metro and what's the inbound course? If you ask me that question, I'm going to have it pulled up and I can tell you that. And, if I don't know it off the top of my head, I'm going to have it for you in 10 seconds.
Sure.
That's something
Yeah.
I could pretty easily provide for you.
For me, it's not, I need you to read me the whole plate. It's, I need to
Sure.
know what my altitudes are on the approach and what my mist is. I mean,
Sure.
those are the key elements in the approach.
Yeah. What's the crossing altitude on the next fix? What's the step down, that kind of stuff. That's certainly something that you can ask and that we could provide you with if, like I said, I probably wouldn't, if you can, it's we're there as a resource to help you all out.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Okay.
Yep.
So, and I was out flying a few weeks ago and doing some practice approaches, and the area was very congested to the point where actually I was on flight following because I was getting some practice approaches in, and I got 3 different targets for awareness that were within like a 3-mile range, and on that particular day, they also were not allowing or not doing any practice approaches. Is that because of density of traffic in the area, or I mean, I know you don't know the exact circumstances, but would that be a circumstance that you wouldn't be able to do at a practice approach?
So the most common reason why we see no practice approaches is due to controller staffing, usually at the towers. Metro has been I don't want to say bad, but they've had they've struggled with their staffing. They've actually gotten better here, I think, recently. I know at Spaceport, they've had no practice approaches recently because of taxiway closures. They've had their issues with taxiways over there where they weren't allowing practice approaches. But most of the time, those are restrictions that come from the satellite towers from Metro, Centennial, Spaceport, and we pass those along. Very honestly, I'd say it is very rare, but there have been times here at the TRACON where we don't have enough people. Like I said, we plan, so we have 20 controllers usually. 10 of those are on the departure / satellite side. I think if I recall, there was a day we were supposed to have 10 or 11 of those people. We had, I think, 4 on a day shift. So, that's 4 people to work every Denver departure and all of Metro and all of satellite. And one of those 4 people is going to be on a break at any particular time while the other 3 are working. So, that's 3 people for all of that airspace. And I know for sure on that day we said, listen, we can't accommodate any practice approach requests, unfortunately, just due to staffing levels. So that is almost always the reason. There are times, especially at Metro and Centennial, where there'll be a period where the IFR inbound aircraft, the number of aircraft is at or above the capacity. We're doing more metering into Centennial, where the traffic management unit will basically have a big timeline, and they'll space aircraft out along that timeline to where the flow of IFR aircraft into Centennial is controlled. And they'll actually reach out into Denver Center and Kansas City Center and slow aircraft down, alter their routes to where we have a stable and consistent flow into Centennial. So during those periods of time, which is not all the time for sure, but there are times where the capacity for runway 35 right at Centennial is that runway is at capacity. So unfortunately, at that time we couldn't do that ILS approach. We could probably accommodate an RNAV approach to 28, if that's what you're looking to do, or certainly, anything into spaceport or metro. And then usually when that happens, within an hour or two, that demand has died off. It's very cyclical. Our traffic kind of goes up and down. So, it couldn't hurt. Is like, it's now, if it's in the morning, busier times, can I get an ILS into Centennial? And then say that, unfortunately, it'd be a pretty significant day. But there are other options for approaches in the airspace.
Okay. Yeah. So you reach out into the approaching traffic and even have them slow out far out to help with spacing.
Yes. Yeah. If you're in, I wish I had a slide where I can show it in the TRACON, there's some large screen TVs above the radar scopes that have basically timelines, and it's every aircraft that has filed a flight plan and every aircraft that's actually airborne. And we know within a few minutes, given their route of flight, ground speed, it'll calculate winds aloft to determine what time they think they're going to get to the runway, to the threshold of the runway, and it'll time that out to where all the aircraft don't show up on a 15-mile final right at the same time.
Right.
Which can be that happens for sure, and it can be a little interesting sometimes.
Right. It's the Oshkosh practice approach. Everybody comes in all at once.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. And just keep holding.
Yeah. So I got another question from John T. He's asking if you could talk about where the FAA is with the automated towers and whether there's whether TRACON and centers are being studied for at least partial automation.
Sure. Yeah, the automated towers, I think they're fascinating what they're doing up there at Northern Colorado. It's I know that's a project. It's been a long time coming. I know they were certainly delayed because of the COVID stuff here, but I think they're getting closer and closer to having that fully certified and operating from the remote tower. And I think there's a lot of potential there to bring towered services to places that haven't had controlled towers. I think Greeley, right down the road from there, would certainly be a good choice for that. And then, you've seen that place be very busy. They could certainly use some help and assistance over there. So I think it's just the beginning of this kind of stuff. I haven't heard about more automation coming in terms of centers and TRACONs. I mean, I'm sure there's people who are looking at it and trying to figure out a way for that to happen. But like I said, I haven't heard about anything in particular coming this way. And just given the safety requirements and how long it takes to get things studied and certified and developed, it'll probably be a little while, I think, before we see anything like that. But that's just kind of my guess here. But
all right, well, I'm going to ask a fun question. So some of the more interesting radio calls that you either hear or things that drive controllers crazy.
There's like I said, I always, it's always good to have fun and enjoy all that. I always like when just earlier today, there was a Frontier, they had a Skyhawk going to Fort Morgan and a Frontier Airlines Airbus going on. Those are the only two aircraft on frequency. And I cleared this Skyhawk direct to Fort Morgan. And then this Frontier captain keys up and goes, "Bill, is that you?" And I was like, "Yeah, what are you doing out here?" That's always kind of fun when you can see it, when you can see all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. It's like I said, I never mind any of that sort of, just kind of lightheartedness, especially when it's a little quieter and there's not as much going on. Pet peeves wise, like I said, there's 60, 70 people here who work here, and it's everyone's got their own little thing. So I try not to let things bug me too much here. You always hear that. I know the one that people always talk about is Kilo and like say no to Kilo. Have you ever heard of that one? If you're looking for flight following and they say, yeah, we're, Skyhawk 1, 2, 3, we're looking to flight following to Kilo Charlie Oscar Sierra. And, it's like, okay, you want to go to Colorado Springs. Okay, I understand. Right. And it's, because when we put that flight plan into our system, we're not using the letter K, the ICAO kilo. So that always, it's just it's a mental thing that really kind of screws with you there. So you have controllers saying, say no to these. If you're looking to go to, an airport way outside of our airspace, I'm looking to go to, Lima, India Tango or something like that for Little Rock instead of KLIT, whatever that is. So,
So how would you differentiate between a VOR and an airport then?
Sure. So generally speaking, for VFR flight following, we're just going to the airport.
Okay.
If it's something where it's, like Cheyenne, where the VORTAC is a little bit offset, we're just going to put in flight following to the destination airport there.
Okay.
When we're talking about, IFR aircraft on a flight plan, if we're clearing you to Cheyenne, we're going to probably be more specific, clear direct to Cheyenne VORTAC, clear direct to Cheyenne airport to provide that distinction. But unless you're really looking to go VFR flight following to Cheyenne VORTAC, maybe let me know. That's where you want to do your flight following. But most of the time, if you say you're going to CYS, I'm assuming you're going to the airport.
I'm certainly guilty of that.
Sure. Again, I understand it's not a big deal, but it's a pet peeve. But not.
It's almost
not
like you could drop the 1 on all the radio frequencies because everything starts with a 1.
Yep.
Okay. Got another question from John T. It says,
Sure.
Can Luke discuss the QAQC is being discussed for automated portions of ATC from tower and above? And I'm not sure what QAQC is.
Sure. So I'm assuming that would be quality assurance and quality control.
Okay.
So we have quality control here. Like I mentioned, we have 1 or 2 people who work in the TRACON here who do quality control. They'll look at all of the, they'll look basically everything that happens in the TRACON that's been written down in the log, any requests from pilots, anything that happens, they'll pull random tapes just to kind of listen to make sure. In any organization, they like to do quality control to make sure the standards are being upheld. And I think, quality assurance is actually one level above that. It's more of like an organization wide across the FAA where they're looking at, what standards are being upheld across the entire organization. Unfortunately, that's about the extent of my experience of quality assurance and quality control. Like I said, if John has some particular questions, I'd be happy to put him in contact with the QC people that we have here. Really friendly people back there. I get along with them really well. What was the question about for the automated portions of ATC? And I guess the question is more about, for say, NOCO tower up there for their remote tower. Is that what the question was about?
And John, you're welcome. Anybody on the call is welcome to join in. I'm just helping with the conversation here by reading the questions.
Luke, in the TRACON, do you have access to real-time weather radar, or is it the same delayed ADS-B weather radar that we have?
Yeah, so we actually have real-time weather radar from the spinning radar dish that you see out there from this called the ASR Airport Surveillance Radar. So that will give us real-time within every about 6 or 7 seconds of radar. It's lower definition than like a NexRad that you could get from Sirius XM or from ADS-B. But it is pretty timely. The other aspect that we see a lot of the time with onboard weather radars for aircraft that are equipped is, certainly that's our depiction of the weather from the location of the radar site. Where if you have onboard weather radar, you're seeing, from directly in front of your aircraft. So if there's, as the radar goes out, if it hits a high intensity radar, it's going to be kind of blinded to anything but behind it, obviously. So we do have pretty real time radar, and it's generally accurate for what it is. But again, it's one tool to use out there, along with Sirius XM, ADS-B, onboard weather radar,
Do you happen to know if center radar, if the centers had the same situation you do with respect to weather radar, or is it all delayed?
Yeah. So I think that theirs is probably a little bit more delayed. They're operating on, you know, a larger number of slower spinning radars. And like I said, I've never worked in a center. I'd be happy to get you some contact information for controllers at the center who could probably give you a more accurate answer. Anything I have honestly would be a guess. So
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
yeah.
Hey, Luke, this is Mike. I have a
Mhm.
question that was emailed to me.
Mhm.
The question is, I've noticed the Denver 2 departure out of Metro has a lost comms procedure that involves the pilot flying direct to Denver VOR, then on filed route, which seems likely to conflict with airline traffic. It seems like this would cause some issues with Denver airport traffic, and so I wondered if this has ever happened.
Sure. Yeah, no, I haven't seen it happen. It would certainly create a potential conflict. If we had an aircraft depart off really anywhere and go missed, we have a feature on our radar where we can basically take any aircraft and put a special code on them, such as emergency, radio failure for Nordo, even hijack is one of the options. Minimum fuel, that sort of thing. So we have these special codes, and when you put them in there, it basically lights up that target on every radar scope, including in the control towers and in the radar room. So if someone goes Nordo, we put that RF, radio failure, on that code, and that way everyone knows here's an aircraft that we're not talking to, basically keep everyone else out of their way.
Okay.
If we saw an aircraft that was flying that Denver 2 Nordo procedure or any of the other Nordo procedures turning towards Denver International, like I said, not an ideal scenario, but at that point, someone would be on the phone to Denver Tower saying, you know, stop the departures. If it got down to it, they would probably, you know, put aircraft inbound into a holding pattern. And that's basically the standard operation for a Nordo aircraft, is just keep everyone else out of the way and watch and see what they do, if that makes sense.
Okay. Second question is, how many months is controller school?
It's an interesting question. Yeah, so it's we kind of get controllers from three different pools. We get people who are hired off the street with basically zero experience. We get people who've gone to college. Some colleges have a air traffic control dedicated curriculum. And we also get former military air traffic controllers. So depending on, you know, if you're someone with a, you know, military experience, you can be hired in directly into a facility. We've had people who've come here who are former military controllers who got hired directly on here at Denver TRACON. But if you're coming from off the street, the FAA actually runs an academy in Oklahoma City, where there's it's basically a pretty intensive, almost like a private pilot ground school, where they teach you kind of the basics of, you know, aviation, navigation, airspace, kind of the stuff that you would learn in Oklahoma City. So that's about the Oklahoma City time is usually about, for radar control, you're looking at about 2 to 3 months in Oklahoma City. And then once you get to this facility, Denver TRACON being one of the busier ones across the country, our certification time is about somewhere probably about 12 to 24 months. So if a former military controller was hired on, they would be looking at, you know, like I'd say probably about 18 months would be about average. Someone completely off the street without that experience would spend about 3 months in Oklahoma City. And then they would be sent from someone off the street, would go to a lower level facility, you know, like you know, somewhere like Rocky Mountain Metro, Casper, Wyoming, something like that. And they would have their training there, which would be somewhere, I would assume, maybe 6 months to a year. And then from there, they can kind of transfer up to busier places, you know. So
Right.
that's something that happens within the FAA. You know, like I did myself, going from a small tower in Florida to Miami and then out to here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anything
So,
else? Thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
let's see, sorry, I was catching up on some other things.
Oh, no worries.
So John followed up. He was specifically wondering about how real-time monitoring under some sample schema would be discussed in FAA circles regarding the QA QC. And yes, we were correct, or you were correct on what it meant.
Sure. It's interesting. I mean, real-time monitoring, they can honestly get to today. There's within the FAA network, you can basically go on a program and pull up a live radar feed of really any radar system in the country. So I can go right now to one of the computers down the hall and pull up the live radar feed from Atlanta or Dallas or anywhere else. So that capability exists right now, where if someone is interested within the FAA network, they can see what's going on. And then we've also seen through things like live ATC and some of these replays online where it's this stuff is kind of broadcast out into the open. So there's people who take that and put it online and make it available. So that real-time monitoring exists kind of to this day. If people are out there actually listening to it. I don't know if that's kind of getting towards the question that Joan had or not, but.
He's actually calling in on the phone. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, good deal.
Well, no, wait. Oh, looks like he's got a second line, maybe. So.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In terms of, using that for some sort of quality control, I would say, there's, like I said, we frequently run 14, 15 positions in there, and we have 1 or 2 quality control people. So that's kind of I think you need more people to watch and listen to every single frequency if they wanted to do that. I don't really know, but they generally kind of go and look at things after the fact in terms of doing it in real time. And I'd also like to mention, I think, Brian, you and I were talking about it beforehand. CPA is actually doing a tour out here in the TRACON. I think it's this Sunday.
Yep.
So yeah, Sunday's one of my days off. So I won't be here this Sunday, unfortunately. But I know we have controllers who will be here to show you all around. And I'd encourage everyone to come out and visit and see this stuff in person, because it's it's interesting. I think so anyway.
Are different controllers in Denver checked out in only certain areas or certain scopes, or can everybody work every position?
Yeah, yes, sir, Bill. That's a great question. We have 2 areas. So for yourself being up there in Grand Junction, the people who work that Grand Junction sector out there is our what we call our arrival area. So those are the people who primarily work Denver International arrivals. And they also work Grand Junction and Pueblo. So that's kind of the way we have the workforce split up here. So for me personally, I don't work the Grand Junction sector. Everything I do is on the Front Range here, but we do have about half the workforce here that works Denver International arrivals, Grand Junction, and Pueblo.
And is that just to make sure that people work in a sector know the airspace and know the layout and everything?
Yeah, when this facility was first created back in '95, I believe, the controller workforce, everyone was certified on everything. Obviously, that takes longer for training. To get someone certified on more positions, you have to train them on those positions. So I wasn't around when that decision was made. I think it was about 10 years ago when they split it up into 2 different areas. But I think it was mostly around reducing training times and making it easier for trainees to come in and get fully certified.
Okay.
So, I mean, personally, I'd love to do it. I think it'd be an interesting challenge, of learning those other sectors. But it's just the way it is right now, I guess.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we ran out of questions.
I thought the gentleman was calling in. No.
Oh, no. There was, I think he's in here twice. I'm just looking at there's one on phone, and then there's another one with the computer.
Oh,
So,
okay. All right.
Yeah, no, that was my misunderstanding.
Okay.
Another question, for 30 years or so, I flew in Southern California, and we would typically come into the LA basin in VFR conditions, and the marine layer would come in and the coastal airports were fogged in, and we just get a pop-up IFR. It was done routinely all the time, didn't stress anybody out, nobody got upset about it. I'm curious, in Denver, is that more frowned upon to have a VFR arrival and into IMC weather locally and just ask for a pop-up IFR?
No, sir. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Actually, sorry. Excuse me. No, I don't think that's a problem at all. It's something we'll see here relatively, frequently, especially this time of year where we have those kind of low IFR, marginal VFR days, and if pilots are out flying around VFR and the weather rolls in, I personally have no problem. I've really never seen anyone else have an issue with giving them that pop-up IFR clearance to get back into where they're going. We do have, this is actually something, we do have a new sector that we're developing on the east part of Denver International. It'll have its own frequency for spaceport, for CFO over there. So we'll be able to provide to split that off into one controller just working the east side of Denver's area, including spaceport arrivals and departures on a dedicated frequency. And we're doing that again just because the volume of GA and flight training, particularly around here, is going up so much that we wanted to be able to split that off if necessary. So, like I said, if the weather's bad and you need that IFR clearance to get back where you're going, then certainly give us a call and we'll get you in there as soon as we can.
Okay, good, thanks.
Yeah.
So when you guys hand off, so like I'm doing a practice approach into pick an airport. How does that handoff happen from the approach to the tower? I mean, obviously I get the, practice approach, retrieve, blah, 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 and contact the tower and you move on your way. When I call in, tower already knows that I'm coming in. How does that handoff happen?
So in each of the control towers, with the current exception of NOCO, currently at Northern Colorado Regional, back up. Each of the towers at Metro, at Spaceport, Centennial, Buckley Air Force Base, they have the same at Grand Junction and Pueblo. They have the exact same radar system that I showed on that slide earlier. So they have a full depiction of the radar that we have in the TRACON. They're zoomed in, so they're kind of focused just on their airport, not at the big picture of the TRACON's airspace. But they'll see every aircraft that's inbound, and we call it the data block. It's the call sign, type of aircraft, speed, altitude, and then we can also put in additional information in what we call a scratch pad, which is it's only a few characters, 3 or 4 characters that we can type in, such as ILS, GPS, that sort of thing. But we can put that information into the data block, which is associated with the flight, with the beacon code, and that's how we pass along that information to the tower. I was mentioning it at Northern Colorado at FNL, and they're currently still in that temporary tower, so they don't have a radar system. My understanding is once they go on to the full remote system, once that's certified, they will have that radar display.
Okay. All I know is I mean, all my interactions have been very, very positive with air traffic control. So
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
This is it's always a fun journey to watch a new pilot who is uncomfortable with having those radio communications, start making those initial calls. And I took a TRACON tour several years ago when they were still going on, and it was very beneficial for me to sit on the other side of the communication and be like, man, this is what you guys are like. This is kind of cool. So and I've certainly had my fair share of bonehead radio calls of there was, and I'll put it out there, one of my favorite dumb ones. I was coming back from Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and the center called up and said how the rides were. And I went on this super long, drawn out, like, well, it's really not too bad. And I mean, we're like at this altitude, it's, kind of, this. And I mean, I probably rambled on for a good minute. And my flight instructor that was sitting next to me leaned over and said, light, moderate, severe. And I was like, yeah, that would have been probably more appropriate. So.
Oh man, that's funny. You always get the one of, say intentions, and I'm working on my private pilot,
Yep, exactly. So,
It's always a
but
classic one.
I think that once you figure out that the people on the other side are human, and when it's busy, yeah, your radio calls need to be crisp. There's no question about it. But even this last weekend, I picked up flight following out of Metro, and my wife and I got chatting, and I missed a call, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, 657, can you squawk? And it's like, or I didn't, and I'm just like, oh, I missed a call. They're doing me a favor, keeping track of me, and I'm not paying attention, returning the favor. So it's
Like I said, that stuff certainly happens, absolutely. And it's and the converse side of it too is there's 65 controllers here and another dozen or so trainees, and like everyone else, we have bad days too. And there's times I'll be sitting next to someone working position, and they'll be a little snippy or short. And I was like, hey, you doing all right? What's going on over there? So I understand those things happen kind of on both sides of the microphone, but we're all here kind of for the same reason, which is to keep aviation safe and get everyone where they're going. And like you said, these tours were kind of getting back to normal. I think here tours are kind of being allowed again. And I'd strongly recommend everyone, if they haven't, go up to the tower, go visit the tower, come out here to the TRACON. And, we're always encouraging and welcoming of that kind of stuff. And, like I said, at the end of the day, we're really just here to help. That's really what we, what we're looking to do. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have any more questions for Luke? Okay. All right. Well, Luke, I want to thank you again for your presentation. That was excellent, and answering all our crazy questions, but it gives us a better perspective on what you do over there. And I'm definitely looking forward to the tour on Sunday. And my wife's coming with me, so that'll be good. So she'll understand a little bit too. But no, this is great. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you for attending.
Mm-hmm.
See you next time.